Collaborative Stakeholder Group, of which we have another PowerPoint, I think. Here we go. So that's on page 27.
Thank you, Chairman. Just by way of a recap, on the 16th of December last year, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council itself, at a full council meeting, directed myself upon appointment to report back to this committee with some options around the future of the tank collaborative process. I commenced employment on the 18th of January, and this report needed to be filed for this committee on the 27th of January, which was essentially with a weekend in the middle, was a week in which to conduct this review of tank. So I just wanted to say that at the outset with a caveat that it was done in an inordinately short period of time, and as such I regretfully was unable to speak with every single member of the tank group. I spoke to a number and I tried to get a representative picture of what had happened, but my comments today are very much caveated in that regard, and so I don't want to give the impression at the outset that I have exhausted every avenue, turned over every stone, and that every single person with an interest in this has been adequately consulted. Just to recap on what the tank group and the tank project is. So the tank project itself is much wider than the tank group. It is a plan change process that needs to give effect to Plan Change 5 and what was indicated in there, and the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management, and address these many emerging issues around freshwater management in the region. It does involve these complex hydrological interactions between the range of catchments we've already discussed today, fundamental to the Heretaunga aquifer, and I would note that is currently, notwithstanding the Chairman's comments, currently the most important economically water resource in the region, and so this is a very significant process for the Regional Planning Committee. In fact, this plan change process is likely to be the most significant water planning exercise undertaken under the auspices of this committee, probably in the decade. A multi-stakeholder group formed in 2012 to build consensus and take this new and different approach to planning. I want to acknowledge that a report was issued in February 2014 with more than 40 interim consensus-based agreements, and that is not to be sneezed at. That's a reasonably significant deliverable, and the group needs to be certainly congratulated for having made that progress and delivered to that point. However, I would characterise that as in large part the easy bit, so the high-level focus on values, objectives, and what have you, and I think everybody involved in the tank group would recognise that the harder issues, the more specific issues that flow into issues around limits, allocation, etc., are still to come. And so I think the issues that I uncovered in talking to people very much reflect the last 12 months, 2015, perhaps part of 2014 too, where that initial enthusiasm, that initial momentum started to drift. Everyone I've spoken to, both within council and in the group, and those that have been observing the process, so there have been a range of researchers that have been observing the tank group process, feel that it has drifted in the last 12 months, and there is a sense that people want to get on and make decisions. One of the reasons that's most commonly cited around that is the critical science inputs, and we did have a discussion about that in relation to the deep water drilling. The surface groundwater interactions, absolutely fundamental to understanding how to manage those flows in those in the rivers, and also the groundwater resource on which drinking water for the populations over the plains and certainly irrigated agriculture fundamentally depends. So that science is utterly essential for the plan change to be successful. And I think the comment has been made by a range of people that we perhaps started this process too early. And with the benefit of hindsight, having known that we wouldn't have the groundwater surface water model ready until the latter part of this year, it may not have been prudent to get underway in 2012 with such a long lag time between initiation and those science outputs being available. What I have also seen is that there hasn't been a high degree of overall program planning and coordination. There is no master plan, if you like, of all of the activities that have to be undertaken and by when. And the Tank Group at its last meeting last year did call for such a master plan to be forthcoming, and I think that's reasonable. I also think that the overall coordination of not just the group's activities but the project itself has been undercooked by our regional council staff. And I think that's just due to the many pressures that have been going on simultaneously. I think this council has been incredibly ambitious in having significant planning reform to give effect to freshwater management national direction and to address many of the freshwater challenges in this region at pace simultaneously on many fronts. And there's some lessons in that, I suspect. I have heard that there's been frustration around changing representation within the group. So some organisations have changed their representation mid-flow, and that has created some challenges in terms of the social capital built up and the relationships built up. And from time to time, people have arrived at the table afresh and raised issues that have either been addressed previously or are not particularly relevant to the issues of the day. There's also been changes in the regional council staff that I would acknowledge. So Tim Sharp, who was a critical staff for support, left the council last year, and of course Helen Codlin left in the middle of last year and had been heavily involved in the early days, but became very much snowed down with Plan Change 6 and the work around that. So there has been some discontinuities there. I've also heard a range of concerns around the relationship between Tank Group and this table, and some frustration there. So some participants within the Tank Group feel that their participation is premised on a view that they are the decision makers and are concerned that they're going to put a lot of time and energy into their collaborative process and dish something up which may look very different by the time it has left this table, and I'll come back to that shortly. Following on from our conversation on the water conservation orders, we are in the middle of a change of practice in resource management in this country. So the traditional process that has been followed, and I think Plan Change 5 might be a little bit symptomatic of that, if I can be perhaps a little unkind to my colleagues. And this isn't a blame thing, this is about cultural change. Traditionally, councils have proposed and defended, and plans themselves have tended to do as little prescriptively as possible, and often when it's come to cumulative effects and difficult allocation issues, and freshwater is a great example of this, we've ended up planning by consent and got ourselves, such as they did in Canterbury, into terrible situations of over-allocation because the planning process wasn't ahead of the consenting process. And so what the central government's trying to do with resource management reform and freshwater reform is get an emphasis on that planning up front so that we plan our resource use more prescriptively, more proactively, so that we avoid those over-allocations, those cumulative effects, etc. Now, to do that successfully requires a high degree of community participation and to get away from a notion of that kind of proposing and defending by councils working behind closed doors, very much having them out on the ground in the community. I also just want to reflect on the fact that while I have heard a very high degree of commitment to the Tank Group, and all members that I've spoken to have said they believe it can deliver and they want it to deliver and they remain committed, it is of concern that some groups have thrown up their hands, if you like, in terms of frustration and pursued this water conservation order in parallel. And I think that does genuinely beg the question of commitment to collaboration. And part of that may be a question of the relationship between national officers, which in the case of Fish and Game has publicly stated their disengaging, if you like, of collaborative process around New Zealand because they don't believe they're getting the outcomes they would like, and wanting to revert to the old style litigious approach. And so I think that is genuinely a question on the table, and it might be more an elephant in the room. I want to finally just mention this in terms of the key issues, this issue of lack of leadership within the group, which came to a head at the last meeting of Tank Group and resulted in the discussion that was had at the council table on the 16th of December. What has been suggested to me is that is a symptom, and I believe it probably is, a symptom of all the other issues that lie above that list, particularly concern about the whole process drifting, not having somebody clearly enough driving the work program overall, and managing the group in a way that it can get on and make progress. And I do just want to acknowledge Robin Wynne-Lewis, the facilitator of the group. Universally, people have said to me that she's done a fine job in terms of facilitating the dialogue. I have heard concerns in relation to that, the leadership question about the role of councillors on the Tank Group. Indeed, it has been put to me by at least 2 participants in Tank, if not 3 or 4, that they're not entirely comfortable, and in 2 cases not comfortable at all, with the notion of a councillor playing a leadership role. In their view, this is and it has been said to me, a stakeholder group, and they see that it should be run by stakeholders and involve stakeholders. They welcome councillors being involved in terms of being observers to the process, being a conduit for dialogue and communication between the council and the process, but they see it as significantly complicating matters, having councillors around the table as decision makers, if you like, within the Tank process, and indeed the idea of an individual councillor playing that leadership role is of concern. A number of participants I spoke to said they somewhat reluctantly at the last meeting agreed to the idea of an interim chair or convener that was a councillor, on the basis that might be a short-term solution until the right person was found. My view, having looked at collaborative processes both domestically and internationally on numerous occasions, is that if you're going to have a chair, the independence of that individual is particularly important to ensure that there is no perception of bias, if you like. One of the roles of a chair that's been put to me is to manage participants when they are taking too much airtime, when they're grandstanding on an issue possibly, or they're bringing extraneous issues to bear. So they would have the function of needing to shut down debate and manage the conversation and manage the agenda to keep it on track. And I think if you have somebody that is perceived as not truly independent of all parties playing that role, notwithstanding their personal integrity or their reputation in the community, it becomes very, very hard for them to be seen neutral over time. So recommendations as per the paper is I believe that retaining Tank as a vehicle for multi-stakeholder dialogue is sound, and certainly the espoused view of the participants I've spoken to at this point is that they are committed to continuing. Having said that, we've got some catching up to do. The science work program needs to get to a point where we can support some useful decision making, and Tank meeting on a regular basis in the first half of this year, the Tank group on a regular basis in the first half of this year, is likely only to continue to frustrate participants in the absence of that science. So we've got some way to go there. I am recommending that I come back to you at your April meeting, although I believe that there might be a proposition to bring that meeting forward slightly, so that squeezes things up a little bit more. With that master plan I spoke to you about, in terms of the whole program of activity that needs to occur leading up to the proposed plan change being notified. At this stage, we still hope that would be the case by the end of 2017. And so you can clearly see what will need to happen by when. We just yesterday appointed a new program leader. This is a new role created in council to bring some coordination to the space, and I'm proposing that Mary Ann also be brought alongside. I think we do need to deal with this issue around the relationship between the Regional Planning Committee and any collaborative process that is initiated, because at the moment there is a degree of ambiguity around this. It's clear to me that while current legislation stands, this is the legally mandated entity to make decisions on regional planning. So the TANK group at this point does not have any statutory role. And while you might all wish to agree around this table that you're going to have particular regard to, or you're going to certainly follow the recommendations of the TANK group to the greatest extent possible, you actually all have a legal duty under the Resource Management Act and under statute which constitutes this table to actually come to your decision making with an open mind to consider a wider range of inputs, because the TANK group itself, while it does represent a wide range of stakeholders, can't represent the entire community. And we do need to have a wider community engagement plan, and we're also proposing a hapu marae engagement plan to work alongside of that. So we bring a range of different things to bear. You will also have to consider national direction. You'll have to consider all of your statutory duties under Local Government Act and the Resource Management Act. So while I think we can give some comfort to the TANK group that their inputs will be substantial in terms of shaping the thinking around a plan change, we can't escape the fact that this table is the legally constituted entity. I also want to come back to you with a refreshed approach about how TANK operates. So there are 30 plus members around the table. Many people have said to me that that is a very large number to work with, and it's quite unwieldy. We might need to look at using small groups, subgroups of that to deal with very specific issues. The meeting frequency will need to be reviewed. And I think we've got to come back to this terms of reference overall, just so we're really, really clear about the relationship between this table and the members of TANK. And so I think that comes to the role of councillors and also the role of the Māori members of this committee too. And as I said, a hapu marae engagement plan. There is provision in the legislation before Parliament right now under the Resource Legislation Bill to give statutory recognition to collaborative processes, and that would limit the rights of appeal to others. And the idea behind that is to incentivise parties to get round the table and resolve things in a collaborative way. Now, the current proposals in the bill would enable this council to request that the Minister provide retrospectivity to the TANK group, for example, to be given that statutory recognition. Now, I think that's complicated on the basis that a whole bunch of people came around the TANK group table under one understanding, and then if you suddenly shift the goalpost and say, well, we're now going to make you a statutory decision maker, people might feel like they might have participated differently or behaved differently had they known that. So I think retrospectivity is a really big issue that you'll need to confront, and you'll also need to consider whether or not you actually want to give statutory recognition to that collaborative process, given that it will limit the rights of appeals to other parties. So there's no point in us trying to resolve that issue until we know that the bill has been passed and what the final colour of that legislation looks like. And I'm proposing that I come back and provide you with some advice on that if and when that legislation has been enacted. Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Dick.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. James, your paper, top page 30, you've said currently, as I said, two principal options are discontinue the TANK group in its current form and purpose and commence a standard plan change process, or two, reconvene the TANK group in due course. You've said in 20, both options will have their pros and cons, but on the light of the uncertainties and unknowns that were referred to above, I consider it would be premature for the Regional Planning Committee to make any final determinations at this time. Then we come to the recommendations, and it seems to me that the recommendations in fact imply that 19.1, discontinuing the TANK group, has been recommended against or is not going to be further considered.
So I'd like to apologise for the haste in which this is written, so this isn't as clear as I would like it. There is a discussion to have with all of the TANK group members, and I think it would be imprudent to make any final decisions about TANK group until staff have had the opportunity to widely canvass the views. So my current thinking is to get the TANK group members around a table and have a discussion about the overall work program, the way in which they're operating and might operate in the future, and then but before your next meeting, bring that back to the April meeting, and then at that point make a final decision about whether or not this rejigged approach is working for everybody involved. Hopefully at that point we've got some clarity around the water conservation order, etc., and then make a decision in a concerted way to just get on with supporting the TANK group and make this work. Or if I hear from stakeholders at that point that it's all getting too hard, people want to just pursue water conservation orders, or they've had enough of all this, then I can bring that to the table at that point. And you might at that point adjudge that there is just not enough collective buy-in to the TANK group to continue with it, and at that point, because we have to get on and do the plan change in any event, we revert to a Schedule 1 process.
Well, with respect, can I say I believe that conversation needs to happen around this table and probably also the council table, because I, for one, at present, lacking information, and I've lacked information about TANK right from its inception. I feel that TANK marginalises this committee, it marginalises the council, and it marginalises me. And what I've seen to date would lead me to favour discontinuing the TANK group in its present form and accepting the collaborative process, because people want to jump ship is not going to work. However, with the assurance of what you've just said, I'll support the recommendations, but in my mind, that option still has to be there, and I believe that you should be canvassing the views of the decision makers around this table in that regard as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got one here, I think, first, and then I'll come over to next item. I don't know.
I'll see if I can formulate a question at the end of my kōrero. Didn't realise you had to have questions, just want to make comments.
Yes, you did.
Look, thank you for your report, James. I think there's a couple of things. Something that really troubles me, and I know it troubles the other iwi members, is processes that might undermine the ability of the RPC to retain the decision-making function that we have, given some of us have fought long and hard to get here. I do think collaboration is worthwhile. In fact, I wanted to check that my understanding of it was correct, and I looked it up just now. So I see these two uses of the verb to collaborate, to work one with another, cooperate, and then the second one I thought was very amusing, to cooperate usually willingly with an enemy nation, especially an enemy occupying one's country. Anyway, let's just go with the first one. In terms of collaboration, I understand from Ian that this is probably the first time that the council's really engaged in such a large-scale type collaboration project, and it's imperfect, obviously, because it's like a pilot. But it sounds like there has been some really great things that have been achieved, and I've seen the interim report that we had some time ago, but also some learnings. So I don't think we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do want to just emphasise that the RPC, for many of us, is the decision-making body, and the concern is that you recall there was a motion put to follow a council resolution that we would accept recommendations from TANK, providing they didn't conflict with any existing plans policies. And I raised a concern about that at the time, that it would be like, whew, you know, we've set up a process to bring the decisions here, and then it's gone off to the right or the left. So I think collaboration is really important. I wouldn't want to see TANK being referred to as a failure, because I don't think it is. And I guess we just want to make sure that we really do focus on the collaborating part, which is making it clear what the purpose is, because in the paper here, there was an incorrect statement, I believe, at paragraph 43, which said that we would go with the consensus of TANC. No, we won't. We will have particular regard to any recommendations from TANC. In the council paper. So I just want to, and I'm hopeful that everybody understands that. So it's really important that when people collaborate, as you said, there's some confusion about what their role is. I would like to see collaboration as emphasising the opportunity to express your values and clarify them, your stance. And if we come out of the collaboration process not agreeing but understanding each other's position better, then that's time well worth spending, because it's only going to come out later anyway. And we might have some wins out of it, but we'll certainly be clear about where we don't agree. So, you need a question?
There's probably 3 or 4 in there, but I hope you haven't started an epidemic. Alan, actually, the first one.
Well, my question is going to be, what do you think of this statement? And the
I'm actually wondering whether we should get to the recommendation, then we can at least
well,
wrestle over it.
I think that given this last set of comments and hearkening back to what James said earlier about meeting with TANC, I think in all fairness to the participants in TANC, we need to put on the table clearly what we think the role of it is going to be, given these statutory things that have already set the stage here, because a lot of those folks feel like they put a hell of a lot of time in to date and may not want to put under a circumstance where they're being told at the end of the day, this is going to go to something called an RPC that can kind of take or leave the advice that has been reached out of that process. A lot of these folks may not want to make that further investment of resource to what then is sort of a 2-step removed advisory kind of role. And so I don't see how you can resolve some of the other. So if they were presented, here is the role you might play in the process, from there would flow maybe from them. A, yeah, we do or don't want to be involved. B, if that's the role, here's how we would like to organize ourselves to meet it, which would throw back to them the issue of, well, how do we best organize ourselves to play the role that you've defined for us, and leave leadership issues and so forth in the hands. And if they want a counselor-led process, they get a counselor-led process. If they want something else, they get something else. But I don't see how you can intelligently do all that, make that decision, until we've squarely put a straw man in front of them that says, this is the limitations of the role you're going to play. And you keep referring to it as a collaborative process, which I gather under this legislation would all of a sudden take a much sharper meaning than maybe is perceived in the group who probably treats consultation and collaboration as synonymous, and that's not, I gather, where this is headed. Anyway, I just think there's a lot of unclarity out there that has to be straightened out.
So I'd concur with the observation that the participants themselves don't all seem to be consistent and clear in their understanding of what they're there to do and how it relates to this committee. And I think that's something that absolutely has to be put to bed so they can all make decisions about how they go forward. And I've certainly heard the argument that there's no point in us being involved unless we are the decision maker. Well, look, whether they like it or not, the statute's very clear at this point in time. This is the statutory decision-making body, and so they need to really clearly understand that, but also, in my view, clearly understand that the significant value of continuing to bring to this table a view about where there is agreement between the stakeholders and where there is disagreement, and if they can narrow that in the process, that will significantly enhance the ability for this table to make prudent decisions on behalf of the community. So I still see great value in TANC Group supporting the Regional Planning Committee, essentially in an advisory capacity. And that is powerful. And certainly if you have a unanimous view from that group on a particular matter, this table, I would imagine, would need significant reasons to depart from that. And there may be very good reasons why you might, and you might refer matters back to them. So it may even be an iterative process whereby you want them to think about some issue more. There might be some values that they haven't explored. And so as we come down the tail end, I see this as a bit of a partnership between this group of advisors that broadly represent the community and this table, which is the statutory decision maker.
Mr. Mohi. Why don't you try being loud? Put your thing off now.
Without trying to be funny, this is quite ironical because it's usually the Māori ones aside within the tank process. It's usually the Māoris that are in the advisory role. And then we're going to find that most of the tank group who are Pākehās are going to find themselves in an advisory role. It's quite ironical, really. Near Toro?
Look, we should put the motion, then we can have the questions after that, maybe. Any questions? I want to talk to it too, but is someone happy then to test the recommendation? You're happy to move the recommendation? Thank you. We have a seconder. Thank you. Tanya, wish to speak?
I do wish to speak. Clearly everyone knows my position on tank. I think it's a difficult, complex process, but it's one we've got to go through. I think James has outlined it very well, except I hotly disagree with him on one issue which I'll come to in a minute. Just on the fact of the RPC in regard to a community group, the RPC is the final decision maker, and if that's not clear to everybody, we need to make that clear. But I agree with what James said, that also we need to have a really close regard to self-determination of our community, whether it's a hapu or whether it's a consensus group which involves hapu, marae, and growers and industrial people on the Heretaunga Plains. If they come to us and we with something which is they have agreed to, and remind Mr. Mohi that in Heretaunga we have involved in tank, we have 17 marae. So it is Mangaroa, but it's not Te Anga, no. So we are a community there, and I mentioned that to Tani before. You know, we've got to see ourselves as a community doing this as a community for the benefit of all the community and the benefit of the rivers and the streams and lakes. So that's the thing. But James, I will take to task on the leadership issue. This is not for you to make this decision. You may think it is, but I will strongly disagree with that. This is for this community to make a decision on who their leader is going to be. And I don't want to say that stronger. I mean, Tom alluded to it. But if you put a leader in front of these people that they don't like, this will fail. And that's why we went to great lengths to, and we consulted widely. And I'm really interested that you say that some people are against it. Well, we didn't find anyone against it. And we spoke to the major stakeholders in Heretaunga. So I'm really interested in getting a few names off you lately so that we can have a chat to them. So I don't think this council or you or anybody else should dictate the leadership of this group on this group. It's up for them to decide who their leader is.
I've got a view on that, which you'll hear shortly. Wish to reply? Second. The leadership thing has been troublesome, but I was incredibly disappointed to hear the whole woes of the whole world was laid at one councillor's feet this morning in an article in the paper. And actually a gentleman, I think, would retract that and probably apologise, because there's more than one person that's got an issue here. Order, I'm speaking. I know some of the names. I've spoken to some of the people myself. This is not wholly a Hastings councillor issue. This is for the whole region. This is significant. It is the pilot program of what we would hope would be a way of the future, because we've got a lot of plan changes to go through. In fact, we've got an incredible amount of work in front of this council. And I was incredibly disappointed to read all the woes of the world laid at one councillor's feet this morning. And I urge you again, councillor, as a gentleman, you would retract that and apologise. That is your choice, obviously, and that's for you to deliberate on. Back to the recommendation, happy to support it. I think it is the common sense way forward. Other speakers? Mr. Wackett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I support the recommendations, but I also like to reiterate a great philosopher by the name of Spinoza. He said, respect is something you've got to have before you can get it. And I believe that we need to be operating along those lines. And also, in terms of the tank group itself, those communities, they need to be given their respect as well. You know, they put a lot of free time into things, go to all these meetings. They have great concerns because they live in environments that they don't like. They want changed. So we have to have good regard to the issues that they raise in front of us. So I support the tank process because that's our only avenue of them getting information and us receiving information. Kia ora.
Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. I don't represent Hastings. I'm the ward councillor for Nararora, and my ward that I represent here are the people who are most affected by this tank process. I didn't push myself forward for leadership. Other people suggested it, and it was widely engaged with tank members before the recommendation went any further. So to say that this process is frustrating for me and that I feel that I've had to withdraw from it puts me in a very bad place. And I just want to make a correction to a perception that I gained when I read this paper, James. There's the resolution that was passed on the front page of your paper at the last council meeting, basically throwing the ball into your court, instruct the Group Manager Strategic Development to review the tank process, and then further down under number 4 it says, Councillor Peter Bevan immediately indicated his intention to resign. It looks like I'm resigning because you were given the task of reviewing the process. That's not the case at all. So I want to clear that misconception up. I resigned because the council refused to endorse the decision that Tank had made to make me interim coordinator, and that in doing that, in my view, the council was departing from its own terms of reference. So we've got two problems here. We've got a terms of reference that the council chooses to ignore, and we've also got a process which we, as we discussed before, it's a collaborative process which is going to make a recommendation to here, and this committee could also ignore the tank process. So it's almost like a double entendre for those people who are trying to commit to the process. And perhaps it's small wonder, given that the whole thing's dragged on for 3 years already, that some stakeholders might consider walking away. I hope they don't. The process has considerable validity, and if it works, it might pave the pathway forward for future plan changes for this region. So although I've withdrawn from the process at the moment, I will take a very close interest in it because it affects very much the people that I represent, and I hope it works, and I hope it doesn't manage to get derailed. So the other thing that I just wanted to point out, I will support the motion, by the way. I felt, James, that in making that resolution that the council made on the 16th of December, I felt it was very much a hospital pass for you, because here you were with your feet still wet under the desk, just arriving in this office, and you had an incredibly difficult task to get your head around a process that's been dragging out for 3 years, and it's clearly got lots of flaws, as we've discussed at various times today, and you had to try and make sense of it. And I absolutely don't blame you for kicking for touch for 3 months, so that you've bought yourself a bit of time to understand it more fully and engage with the stakeholders who are there, and I certainly encourage you to do exactly that.
Thank you. Other speakers, Councillor Balfour.
Yes, I think what's clear about this to me is that there needs to be a lot of discussion, deal making, if you want to call it that occurs outside the formal process, whatever the formal process is. If we looked, a couple of us looked into the Land and Water Forum process, and the chairman of that group made very clear to us that a major part of, the principal part of his role was to identify the flashpoint issues, identify the people who needed to be congealed around those issues, try to nudge those forward, and that's a process that is the process that is needed on something that has as complex a set of trade-offs and options and opportunities and so forth as this one does. And so the issue is, where does that come from and how does it happen? And it's certainly not going to happen out of this committee. So whether it is tank, whether it is, there's going to need to be a mechanism of some kind if you actually want to sit iwi, environmentalists, irrigators, other interests down, water storage people, whatever it is, and sort out what are the actual opportunities here, where are the contours of the deals that are needed to make something this complicated go forward. And so personally, I agree with Rex. I don't see how this happens if it isn't being driven by someone who clearly has the full confidence and buy-in of the major parties directly affected by the outcome. Sure, it is a region-wide decision. Sure, it has larger ramifications, but there's an identifiable set of people. They are in the tank group at the moment. All of them are. And that somehow has to be managed in a way that issues get massaged along at the pace they can be massaged along, and then that solution needs to be added to that one and traded off against that one. That is a political process that needs to be driven by a political player who has the confidence of everyone involved. And as Rex outlined, we very methodically canvassed all the players involved in tank presently to build a consensus around a path forward. And why we would choose to chuck that at this stage of the game when it's the only thing that we have to hang on to move the process forward. It's the only thing that is holding it together at the moment, because now we're going to go back and tell folks, well, you don't matter that much because we have an RPC that can take or leave what you have to say here. So how do we get them to continue to play ball? I think you need to give them the leader they want.
Mr. Chairman, those recommendations up there are not the same as what are in our...
There's a summation of those recommendations.
summation.
So that's the end of the...
But it doesn't, here again, you've said retain.
That tidies it up.
You've said retain tank as a multi-stakeholder group, so that you are making a recommendation on the two options there, which is not actually in our paper.
For now.
Pardon?
For now.
For now. So what are we adopting? Are we adopting that?
We're adopting what's on your paper.
It's on page
Clearly.
recommendation 1.
31.
Yeah. So you wish to speak further, Councillor Dick?
No, I'll support it, but I don't want the presumption made or considered to be made that tank continues, because the other option, I think, should still be on the table. That is discontinued.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you on your paper, James, and I'd like to congratulate you on your presentation of the paper. You've brought some clarity and rigour to this discussion, which I think has been missing. And the clarity and rigour needs to be about the respective roles. And you've heard where this has not been present by one of the members here who's really smart on these issues, Tanya, And she says, well, I'm confused, really not clear about who's making, the decisions here. We've said this, we've said that. Is it the RPC? Well, we need this to be absolutely clear. If there's not clarity at this table here, well, then we have failed. So that's the first thing you've done is make a strike for that, and I agree with that. So we need to strengthen that so we're absolutely clear. And you are right, the statutory authority rests here and here alone, nowhere else. And this committee has to take into account the recommendations of whoever it is, plus all the other statutory recommendations that come into it. So no one can bind us unless it's been agreed that we will be bound by that decision. And we have not, and probably will not. So that's the first thing. So we need to get that. Now the next thing is, we've got an issue in front of us here, and we've got two basic paths forward. One is a formal process, and the other is informal, what I describe as a collaborative process. And for better or for worse, we've chosen the collaborative process. I personally like collaboration. I like people to be able to choose their leaders, to choose their rules, to choose their laws, to make their own decisions about how they live their lives. Having people come in from the outside and tell them from the outside, you will do, I resist that, and most people do. So in this area here, I prefer the collaboration. I think it's done a lot of things. Now, what I've seen of it, and I'm a little bit in Alan Dick's position, Councillor Dick's, I don't know everything that's gone on, but I don't worry about that. I don't know all the issues that have gone, but again, I don't need to know that. What I'm looking for is the outcome. But what I have seen is enormous amount of goodwill. Everybody I've spoken to, great goodwill. I've also heard a lot from people about good intentions. This is what they want. They want good intentions for the area, for the region, for the rest of it. I've also heard differences. People got strong differences. But I've also heard that they want to resolve those. What we don't have at this stage, in my view, is a necessary manoeuvring machinery or leadership to draw those things together and to help resolve them. So that's that bit. I think that's the key element here. Clarity about roles, clarity about the leadership position. The next thing is that I think this council is going to have to make its decision about its relationship with it. If we are going to give people the opportunity to go and work collaboratively and bring their own recommendations to us, then we have to give them the space to do that. If we're going to send a drone over every so often and have a surgical strike and bomb a decision from afar, they're going to say, well, the drone operators, you go and do what you want to do, we're out of here. Which means if they want to choose a leader for themselves, that's their choice. What views we have about it, we must respect it. Knowing that what we're looking for at the end is their recommendation as a group for us to consider as their recommendations to ours. If it's unanimous, as you've said, you will have much more weight than if it's a divided opinion. So the better they can organise themselves, the better it will come to us. And the advantage for them is that if they collaborate and can build a consensus for outcomes, then they've got a much better chance of getting them through this process than any other process at all, whether it be a formal process, whatever it is. This is their best opportunity. And it can be as quick as what they do. So I think this council has to say, clarify the roles, accept the good things that have been done, tell that group to sort out its leadership situation. We want to have some clarity about that. Say to them, these are the roles, do you sign up for them or not? And so they're clear about that, and then let them get on with the job. And say, we expect you to come back to us with a decision in this time. We cannot muck around. If we don't have a decision or near enough to it, then we'll have to go to a formal process. This is something that needs to be done. So, clarity about it, but let them get on with the job.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Palmer raised a number of interesting points in his presentation. One, the over-ambitious program of the number of planning decisions that we had on our books. And yes, I couldn't agree more with that. You also raised a second point, that the planning process needs to be ahead of the consenting process. There's your answer. We actually went through a very short-term consenting process some years ago, and with an assurance that we would be giving certainty within that time. Hence, probably, we bit off far more than we could chew. But that's looking backwards, Mr. Chairman. I think this paper is looking forward, and it's looking for a direction and some resolution around this, and I really want to speak in support of the recommendations. Mr. Palmer referred to the importance through a collaborative process of being able to narrow the issues, to reach agreement where you can reach agreement, but at least even to identify where you can't, that allows a subsequent decision-making, such as at the RPC, to actually be more prudent in their decision-making. So no matter what, it helps inform this group. Whoever has the decision-making, we are better informed by the process. So I do look forward to Tank actually successfully operating in the future, because I think it has huge value. The other thing I really would like to speak to, and I think this is addressed through the paper, is the integrity of the collaborative process. No matter whether we're faced with a Schedule 1 process or whether the bill eventually comes out with a prescribed collaborative process, it still is a public process, and there are still members of the public there that can engage with it. And no matter what, I cannot see the power of being able to get to the Environment Court being entirely removed. So the process actually has to have integrity at every step, both in its recommendations back to the RPC, but also if it's going to carry weight with the Environment Court, it actually has to have that integrity well and truly established for the Environment Court to actually be given due weight. And that is what I would look forward to, because I don't want people wasting their time. I want their efforts to be effective, and I want them to be effective in the best way. And so I'm going to speak in support of the motion.
Wish to sum up?
Wasn't that a wonderful opportunity, eh?
Respectfully?
Respectfully, hopefully. You got a question? No,
You've gone on. Afternoon tea's at 3:15, so that might work quite well. Councillor Hewitt?
Thank you. I'll take you to 3:14. James, thank you very much. We had a rather robust discussion back in our December meeting, and I was quite keen to see that the tank process was dropped in your lap and you had the opportunity to review it, and I appreciate that you had a very short window within which to do it, but I think that you've provided a really good broad brush and you've grasped the issues very succinctly, and I've appreciated just getting your oversight on them. So as to your recommendations, and you've brought yourself to 3 months, which I think is important, but most importantly, the thing that you nailed for me was that you spoke about the social capital that has been invested in the tank process and the relationships. And it's just so important that not one of us around this regional planning committee table or the council table undermine the amount of time and effort that stakeholders put into these meetings. A lot of them are turning up off their own bat week after week. This has been going on since 2012, and month after month, whether there's 6 weekly meetings or not. They're investing because they believe in a process, and they're respectful enough to give and take of their time and other people's time to put the community in a better footing. So I think the commitment to collaboration is really important, and I'm pleased to see that in upcoming paper that there is going to be some more emphasis put on that from a legislative angle. The integrity of the collaborative process is really important for where we're sitting here in Hawke's Bay. Another thing that you nailed nicely, I thought, was gifts and gains, and it's all about, you give a little to get a little. It's not about one party throwing their toys out of the cot and just going straight to the minister and saying we want this. It's about actually taking the time to appreciate what's going on. So in terms of where you're going here, I think that you're really clear about where we're going, and you're really clear about how we're going to get there, and I look forward to the outcomes that the tank group take, because they'll be the ones who ultimately take ownership of the leadership and where they're going. And I certainly will be very proud to be part of a process here that makes sure that the recommendations that come from tank are given weighting when they get to this table and the council table. So best of luck. You have a great job in front of you.
I guess I would endorse all that. As you know, I'm very strong on the process, and I think a new face such as yourself will be good to look at this freshly. Since the chair did raise it, I just want to say that again, that I was hugely disappointed that the council, not one councillor, but 5 councillors rejected Tank's right to choose their own leadership. And I do feel that that trampled on the mana of Tank and of all the people of Heretaunga who those people represent.
Point of order,
Now,
Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
not going to retract that.
Point of order.
Well, he's finished.
We don't introduce new material in summing up.
He's finished, so that's fine. Let's put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried unanimously, luckily, because another member has left and we would be getting close to our quorum limit. So unanimous decisions now are okay. Anything else, 2 councillors have to rescind. Cease and desist. Let's go and have a quick cup of tea. 5 minutes, stretch your legs, please, and let's try and wrap this up by 4 o'clock.